From the incredible Ocean Casino Resort and the Gallery Bar, Book, and Games, this is the JAKIB Media Eagles pregame show with Seth Joyner, Derek Gunn, and myself, Mark Farzetta. We'll be giving you all the coverage you need leading up to Eagles-Texans in a Thursday night football edition. Eagles, as we all know, hottest team in the NFL. It goes without saying when it comes to a 7-0 record in the NFL, the last remaining NFL team that is undefeated. They got another opponent in front of them on short rest this time after going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers and winning that game handily 35-13. Eagles have a 1-5-1 team in front of them in Houston, not named the Astros, but this team, of course, the Houston Texans. Gunner, I'm looking at this matchup, and it just can't be that easy, can it? Looking at a team that can't defend the run against a team that runs the ball very well. And looking at this, I want to get this stat in right out of the gate. 137 yards on average is what the Houston Texans allow to top running backs from their opponent. 137 yards and a touchdown per game. So, Gunner, could it be that easy? Just give
what do you think they're going to do?
Well, let's see.
Give the ball to Shady?
Let's see. Tennessee ran for 312 on them last week. This team, I hope this is a historic game in terms of the shortest game in the history of the NFL. I wish they would run the ball 75 times in this game and just keep the clock going because Houston cannot score with this team. Now, I must start by saying anything that I say about the Houston Texans tonight is all said in jest. I must start with that disclaimer. But to answer your question, yes, it could be just that easy. Houston is the worst team in the National Football League. They are devoid of talent. They can't run the football. Their two top receivers are not playing in the game tonight. One is disgruntled. They can't stop the run. The good thing about Houston, if you're a Houston fan, is they're only giving up 22 points a game, but the Eagles may have 22 points in the first quarter, Seth.
Well, listen, I'm going to give the Eagles the propers that they deserve. They're going to go in here and just wear this team out. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I think that this team is mature enough to understand the circumstances. Last week they played against an inferior team. They took care of business. They'll do the same this week, realizing that they've got a little mini-bye working where they get some time off before they come back against a divisional foe on Monday Night Football.
Now, the whole thing of the short rest. I like what Nick Sirianni had to say after they handled their business against the Pittsburgh Steelers, which is if you believe this is an advantage, then it is, in fact, an advantage. Can it even be close to an advantage, though, when you're the team on the road Thursday night traveling, even though it's a bad opponent, we all know that, can it still be an advantage for the Eagles, even though they're the road team on a Thursday night?
Well, listen, it's an advantage because they're just simply the better football team. The Texans, they know deep down inside that they don't stand a chance against the NFL's last undefeated team and arguably, the best football team in the National Football League. So they're going to come out and give their best. But at the other end of the spectrum, they know that once they get behind, that same old feeling that losing teams get when they get behind, that, oh, my God, here we go again feeling, that at that point it's a wrap.
All right, now, Gunner, I've never heard a coach admit to this, and listening to the coaches leading into this game, one of the coaches, Nick Sirianni, the head coach, most important, talked about how they had started preparing for the Houston Texans 2 weeks ago. So while they were on their bye week, instead of just looking at the Pittsburgh Steelers and concentrating on the Pittsburgh Steelers, you would figure if it's going to be a short week, they're going to go ahead and just do some prep for the team that's after a team that's not that good in the Steelers. I've never heard a coach actually admit to that. Have you ever heard that before?
No, but when you look at the last two opponents they have played in Pittsburgh and Houston, basically you're talking about two of the same entities, losing franchises right now. I think you could have basically set up one game plan and run the same game plan against both teams because both teams are that bad right now. I'm not kidding. You look at how bad Pittsburgh was. I mean, they made a game of it for a while because the Eagles let them get back in the game. How did they do that? Well, they didn't blitz the quarterback. They let him get comfortable in the pocket, number one. Number two, same ugly problem reared its head. They allowed him to start running the football and picking up yardage. I don't even think Houston can run the football. They have a pretty good young running back, but their offensive line is a mess. The quarterback should be a backup. Your star player, Brandon Cooks, is pouting. He's not playing tonight. I mean, what do you have other than looking forward to going home after this game if you're a Texans fan?
It is a nice stadium. Have you ever been to the stadium?
It's
a nice stadium they have in Houston.
Yeah.
It's a shame we're getting Seth to smile about this already.
That's what we're resorting to.
In all seriousness, Gunnar mentioned the play so far this year of Davis Mills, the starting quarterback, believe it or not, for the Houston Texans. And I didn't even know you were allowed to be an NFL quarterback, a starting NFL quarterback, if you had a sub-90 passer rating anymore. Because I'm never saying that it's easy to play quarterback in the NFL. Not saying that at all. And Seth, I think you would agree with this. But it's never been easier to play quarterback in the NFL than it is today. When you look at this quarterback right now, he is throwing with his 81.9 passer rating in this game, going into this game. He's throwing into the best secondary in the NFL, two of the highest-rated cornerbacks in the NFL, and James Bradbury and Darius Slay. And they also have now C.D. Deuce, who is seemingly attacking quarterbacks at will almost. Not as much as we'd like in Jonathan Gannon's defense, but still, they are being a little bit more aggressive than we've seen over the last couple of weeks. What do you do? How do you game plan when you see a guy that is struggling pretty much in every facet of the game?
Well, my first take would be, if the guy is struggling and you can't, the only thing you can do is run the football, and you put him in obvious passing situations, then I want to apply pressure. Okay, but we can talk about that till the cows come home. We know that's just not going to be the case. We're going to look and see how well our four-man rush does tonight. The only thing that worries me about the Eagles' defensive front is the absence of Jordan Davis, because that prevents them from running their five-man front. Now, you can take Javon Hargrave, in my opinion, and slide him over there and move Milton Williams over in his spot, and at least against the pass, you create a better pass rushing situations when you want to rush five. They don't have a lot of star wide receivers, so I would look for the Eagles to be in a five-man front the majority of the time tonight, where you're rushing and you got 5-on-5 blocking. And if they decide they want to send all five out into the pass coverage, then that means that somebody should be getting home, and it should be another one of those nights. You talked about Davis Mills. Mm-hmm. I loved this kid when he came out of Stanford. Very, very good player, very smart player. And D-Gun, you talk about him being a backup. But if you don't have an offensive line and you don't have any weapons, what could we expect a young player like this to try to get accomplished? I talked about it on my show this week with, Sean Salisbury. He does radio down in Houston, and we talked about the same thing, that all they have is a running game. And when all you have is a running game, that's an advantage for the quarterback. But when you don't have any weapons, for him to throw to, and he's still trying to learn coverages. He's still trying to pick up on disguises and things of that nature, and when teams are going to blitz and when they're not going to blitz, and you don't give him any weapons. So this is just a tough situation all the way around for this football team, to the Eagles' advantage defensively, because I don't think they have to do a whole lot differently than they've done the last couple of weeks in order to have another dominant game. And if they get up like we expect for them to get up based upon what their defense is, their defense is ranked next to last in every statistical category that you can even dream about. I mean, I was absolutely blown away when I began to do my homework on this team to see that they were that bad. Well, I guess 1-5-1 tells you everything you need to know. But the Eagles should dominate on the defensive side by shutting down the run. That's the biggest thing you got to take care of. Then complementary football is the Eagles take the first two drives in the first quarter, go down and score, apply more pressure to the offensive side, put the offensive coordinator in a situation where he has to throw the ball, and now you let the big dogs eat on the defensive side, and that's going to create turnovers on the secondary and the back end.
For me, this is a game where the Eagles on both sides of the football can pad their stats, okay? They had 6 QB sacks against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I expect them to get at least that many sacks against this Houston offensive line. The running game. Tennessee ran the ball 45 times for 314 yards. I expect this team to have at least 200 yards rushing against this Houston defensive front. A.J. Brown should even easily have 100 yards well before this game is over. Miles Sanders should be over 100 yards. Now, obviously, you don't disrespect any opponent, but when you look at this matchup, this is the consummate David versus Goliath matchup. I mean, that's how bad it has been for Houston. Now, the fact that Tennessee ran for 300 and something yards of them, but only has 17 points, leads you to believe, okay, so Houston is going to stand there and fight to the best of their ability. As bad as they are, they're only giving up 22 points a game, but they're only scoring like 15 points a game. So, they make it respectable. They just can't beat you.
Mm-hmm. And a team like the Eagles, and we'll get into this in just a second, but when you talk about a team like the Eagles, we're going to be looking for them to play yet another complete game. Even going into last week, when you're talking about a 7-0 team, you're talking about a 6-0 team, now with the potential to go 8-0 on the young season, well, midway through the season at this point. When you're talking about the Philadelphia Eagles, we've been talking about, can they not just score points in the second quarter? Can they score throughout a football game? And I think the tall tale sign for them really dominating this game is if Gardner Minshew is again getting snaps in the fourth quarter. We'll talk about how the Eagles can dominate this game a little bit further and what they could do with their running game, especially with Miles Sanders after this, as we welcome in our brand new sponsor of the pregame show here in the JAKIB Media YouTube channel, as well as here, people watching on 6abc.com. We'd like to give a tip of the cap to Salus University.
At Salus University, our graduates are among the most highly trained in their profession because of our unique emphasis on research, interprofessional collaboration, and early clinical exposure. Learn more about our programs at salus.edu.
Welcome back to JAKIB Media pregame show. Gunnar, you were just talking about the dominance of this team, and we're talking about how you can possibly dominate again for 4 quarters of football. Do you think the ultimate sign that you handled your business is not only padding your own stats in a game like this, but also being able to get some guys that normally don't get run, normally don't get reps in a game?
Well, they took their regulars out with 9 minutes to go in the game on Sunday against Pittsburgh. I expect it to fully happen again in this game, which is really good in terms of healing up bodies, because after this game they have like 11 days off. The big question I have, Seth, and I'm going to turn to you on this one because we talked about this in the post-game show as I brought it up. We did not see Nakobe Dean last Sunday against Pittsburgh when all the subs were playing. If he doesn't play tonight, what does that tell you? For me, is it the first thing that comes to mind is it the shoulder, or does he not have a grasp of the defense?
Well, I'm of the opinion if it's the shoulder, then why you even have him active?
Exactly.
Let's just admit that that's what it is. Get him, the rest that he needs. Activate Davion Taylor, move him up because he can play special teams as well. There's no sense in having a guy that can't contribute because I don't hear his name even on special teams.
No.
So if he's not contributing, you don't activate the guy just to activate him unless, that's some kind of, ego thing that the Eagles are playing because they drafted him and there was so much hoopla around him. But it is kind of alarming to me because he's not getting any experience. And what you have to do is you have to look at that linebacker position and you got to think forward. See, it's easy to get caught up in now, but I can get caught up in now, but I can also look forward. And when I look forward at the linebacker position, okay, you got 2 starters. You've got T.J. Edwards, Kazir White. T.J. Edwards just re-signed last year. Kazir White is on a 1-year prove-it deal, okay? The way he's playing, are you going to be able to afford to re-sign him next year? And the question is, do you really want to, D-Gun, at the end of the day? Because what's going to happen is people are going to continue to clamor about Nakobe Dean not being able to get on the field. See, I always thought that, they're taking their time with Nakobe Dean, and they're going to get to a situation where as the year goes on, he'll start getting more and more playing time, a little more experience, because the Eagles can't afford to pay all the guys that they got to pay. You got Bradbury, you got Gardner, C.J. Gardner. Yep. You got all of these players, and linebacker isn't a position they really want to spend any money on. The smart thing is get the year out of Kazir, then have Nakobe Dean come on. But to your point, I don't know whether it's an injury, whether he's not just getting it done, whether he's not picking up the defense. No one knows what it is. It's almost like, this guy's turned into Casper the Ghost. We don't see him. We know he's there, but and I know Halloween just ended, but we don't know where he is or what's really going on with him, and that's alarming to me.
Right. And this obviously doesn't necessarily tie into football, but the guy is a brilliant human being. When you look at the fact that he was a mechanical engineering major and wanted to dabble in pre-med, you know that the guy is definitely book smart. It's whether or not he can really break down those schemes that the Eagles are trying to run out.
Well, like I said, I don't know.
Right.
I have no idea. I have no inside information that tells me that, picking up the defense is the struggle for him. What I do know is that he is a slighter built, I should say, linebacker. And the NFL and the NCAA are two different animals. I mean, they're majorly different animals. And sometimes, these undersized linebackers that they like to play with nowadays, they do it because they need these guys to be fast. But at the same time, the offensive linemen aren't getting any smaller. I mean, they're averaging 315, 320, sometimes 330 across the board. And you got an undersized linebacker that's living at 215, 220, 225. If he doesn't know how to use his hands and he don't know how, and his footwork isn't where it is, he could get swallowed up and disappear, very, very quickly. So maybe that's what they're seeing in practice. Again, I don't know. I don't know if that's the case, that, he's just not getting it done, or he's having problems picking up, the defense. But you would expect for him to get a little more playing time than what we've seen.
Oh, I 1,000% agree with that. The other interesting thing is this week it came up, the scheme of the Philadelphia Eagles, if it's different than last year or if you just have more talent in general. Nakobe Dean obviously not part of that question yet because you haven't really seen him on the football field at all throughout the course of the year, especially not last week. Gunnar, as you pointed out, he wasn't even on when they had the backups in the game at the end of the game against the Steelers. However, Jonathan Gannon's defense, this defense with TJ Edwards being another year better, CD Deuce coming in to be in your secondary, having Jordan Davis up till last week, having these better linebackers here. You have seen the production in terms of the yards per game are still pretty much where they were at last year. The turnovers have jumped a lot higher than what they were last year. One of the best teams in the NFL this year, the best actually in turnover differential. Interceptions are up there with this secondary, and I can't believe it, but you're actually getting after the quarterback as well. You're one of the best teams in the NFL at sacking the opposing quarterback. So Seth, I'll ask you, because we talk about this all the time. Is it a matter of the scheme being better, or do you simply have better talent with Jonathan Gannon this year?
I think he's got better talent because there's no doubt about it. His blitz rate, his blitz percentage has not gone up substantially. I think last year he hovered somewhere around 13 to 14%, and I would be just totally mystified if it was that much higher. I'd give him 15 to 16% this year. Last week's game, I only saw one blitz the entire game. Now, if I missed something, I missed something, but all I saw was one real pressure all game last game. It's just not who he is, and when you look at this defense, yes, it's miles better than what it used to be. I attribute it to a couple of different things. I think that the secondary is playing a lot more aggressive and a lot more tighter than they did last year. I mean, there were times last year where I looked at the cornerbacks and they were playing 7-8 yards off the ball. You're begging the quarterback to just raise up and throw the ball out there and take 5 or 6 yards on first down if you're going to play that way. I think that they're up more. I think they're playing a little more man coverage because they believe that their corners, can cover better. And you can see when they go to man coverage, the target is Bradbury because he's been labeled as, the cornerback that is more of a zone-type quarterback, and you saw them really go at him last week. They're running a lot of things where, they drop C.J. Gardner Johnson down in a robber position for some of those crossing routes because he's just a ball hawk, and the guy is really, really good at what he does. Now, you can get away with that kind of stuff when you have young quarterbacks that really that can't see everything that's transpiring in front of them. Against more veteran quarterbacks, listen, if he lines up a half a yard shallow or half a yard wider than he's supposed to, that guy, that veteran's watched enough film to be able to tell you what he's disguising and what he's going to go to. That's the difference. But this team is miles better than what they were last year, and yet they're still not as aggressive as I'd like to see them because I think they have enough on the defensive side of the ball to be dominant.
All right, fair enough.
And can you imagine a dominant defense the way this offense is playing?
Yeah, especially if we get you as a defensive coordinator at some point. I mean, you never know. Maybe the defense is great and they end up actually hiring Jonathan Gannon. He already interviewed for the position a year ago, so you never know. You don't have to
Y'all
answer now.
You just like stirring the pot, don't you?
Gunnar, what say you? Do you go scheme or do you go personnel?
I think it's definitely personnel. I think we're looking at the same thing we basically looked at a year ago, except you have much more athletic, versatile people playing the positions. You made a significant upgrade in your linebacking core with Kazir White, Hassan Reddick. Look at what the umbrella that you've improved upon on the back end of your defense. You now have the perfect cornerback to complement Darius Slay. You have two guys that can play man-to-man coverage whenever they decide. Whatever they wanted to play, you can play it with them. Most teams are lucky if they have one shutdown corner. This team has two shutdown corners. They bring in C.J. Gardner-Johnson. You know, he's playing out of position, but he's starting to get comfortable in that safety spot. And then you have one of the best slot corners in the game in Avonte Maddox. I mean, you have a luxury of talent on the back end of that defense. So, you know, we sit here and we scream every week about not blitzing, not putting pressure on quarterbacks. When you consider who they've played at quarterback this year outside of Kirk Cousins, it's not much of a test.
No, it has not been. When we come back, a couple of interesting things, a couple of interesting nuggets from earlier in the week. One, Fletcher Cox helping out the offense and Jason Kelsey helping out a wide receiver. We'll get into that. Plus, we'll be joined by John McMullen all the way from Houston, Texas when we return here on the JAKIB Media Pregame Show.
Go to get your game on. Go for the beers. Go for the cheers. Go for the hit and the hits. Go for the stakes and the stakes. Go to get your parlay on. Go to get your party on. Go for the scene. Go for the screens. Go for the gallery. Go for the win. Go to Ocean. Visit theoceanac.com to plan your visit.
Do you stream on a Roku, Fire Stick, Android TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6